The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I want to begin by echoing what you've just said. My gratitude to all members of the House for assembling on a Saturday for the first time in 37 years, and indeed to all members of our House Commons staff who have worked to make this sitting possible. And I know it's meant people giving up their Saturdays, breaking into their weekends at a time when families want to be together, and of course it means missing at least the end of England's World Cup quarter-final. I apologise to the House for that, and I wish I could watch it myself. I know the honourable member for Cardiff West has postponed his 60th birthday party, if not his 60th birthday, to be here. So, Mr. Speaker, the House has gone to a great deal of trouble to assemble here on a Saturday for the first time in a generation. And I do hope that in assembling for the purposes of a meaningful vote, that we will indeed be allowed to have a meaningful vote this evening. And with permission, Mr. Speaker, I shall make a statement on the new agreement with our European friends. And the House will need no reminding that this is the second deal and the fourth vote 3.5 years after the nation voted for Brexit. And during those years, friendships have been strained, families divided, and the attention of this House consumed by a single issue that has at times felt incapable of resolution. But I hope, Mr. Speaker, that this is the moment when we can finally achieve that resolution and reconcile the instincts that compete within us. Many times in the last 30 years, I've heard our European friends remark that this country is half-hearted in its EU membership. And it is true that we in the UK have often been a backmarker, opting out of the single currency, not taking part in Schengen, very often trying to block some collective ambition. And in the last 3.5 years, it has been striking that members on all sides of this House have debated Brexit in almost entirely practical terms, in an argument that has focused on the balance of economic risk and advantage. And I don't think I can recall a time when I've heard a single member stand up and call for Britain to play her full part in the political construction of a federal Europe. And I don't think I've heard a single member call for ever closer union or ever deeper integration or a federal destiny. Mon pays Europe. Well, perhaps I've missed it, but I don't think I've heard much of it, Mr. Speaker. And there is a whole side of that debate that you hear regularly in other European capitals that is simply absent from our national conversation. And I don't think that has changed much in the last 30 years. But if we have been sceptical, and if we have been anxious about the remoteness of the bureaucracy, if we have been dubious about the rhetoric of union and integration, if we have been half-hearted Europeans, then it follows logically that with part of our hearts, with half our hearts, we feel something else, a sense of love and respect for European culture and civilization of which we are a part. A desire to cooperate with our friends and partners in everything, creatively, artistically, intellectually, a sense of our shared destiny, and a deep understanding of the eternal need, especially after the horrors of the last century, for Britain to stand as one of the guarantors of peace and democracy in our continent. And it is our continent. And it's precisely because we are capable of feeling both things at once, sceptical about the modes of EU integration, as we are, but passionate and enthusiastic about Europe, that the whole experience of the last 3.5 years has been so difficult for this country and so divisive. And that is why it is now so urgent for us to move on and to build a new relationship with our friends in the EU on the basis of a new deal, a deal that can heal the rift in British politics, unite the warring instincts in us all. And now is the time for this great House of Commons to come together and bring the country together today. As I believe people at home are hoping and expecting, with a new way forward and a new and better deal both for Britain and for our friends in the EU. And that is the advantage of the agreement that we have struck with our friends in the last 2 days. Because this deal allows the UK, whole and entire, to leave the EU on October the 31st, in accordance with the referendum, while simultaneously looking forward to a new partnership based on the closest ties of friendship and cooperation. And I pay tribute to our European friends for escaping the prison of existing positions and showing the vision to be flexible by reopening the withdrawal agreement, and thereby addressing the deeply felt concerns of many in this House. And one of my most important jobs is to express those concerns to our European friends. And I shall continue to listen to all honourable members throughout the debate today, to meet with anyone on any side, and to welcome the scrutiny the House will bring to bear if, as I hope, we proceed to consider the withdrawal bill next week. Today, this House has a historic opportunity to show the same breadth of vision as our European neighbours, the same ability, resolve to reach beyond past disagreements by getting Brexit done and moving this country forwards as we all yearn to do. This agreement provides for a real Brexit, taking back control of our borders, laws, money, farming, fisheries and trade, amounting to the greatest single restoration of national sovereignty in parliamentary history. It removes the backstop which would have held us against our will in the customs union and much of the single market. For the first time in almost 5 decades, the UK will be able to strike free trade deals with our friends across the world to benefit the whole country, including Northern Ireland. Article 4 of the protocol states Northern Ireland is part of the customs territory of the United Kingdom. It adds, nothing in this protocol shall prevent Northern Ireland from realising the preferential market access in any free trade deals on the same terms as goods produced in other parts of the United Kingdom. Our negotiations have focused on the uniquely sensitive nature of the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic, and we have respected those sensitivities. Above all, we and our European friends have preserved the letter and the spirit of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and upheld the long-standing areas of cooperation between the UK and Ireland, including the Common Travel Area. And as I told the House on the 3rd of October, in order to prevent a regulatory border on the island of Ireland, we propose a regulatory zone covering all goods, including agri-food, eliminating any need for associated checks at the border. But, Mr. Speaker, in this agreement we have gone further by also finding a solution to the vexed question of customs, which many in this House have raised. Our agreement ensures, and I quote, unfettered access, market access for goods moving from Northern Ireland to the rest of the United Kingdom's internal market. It ensures that there should be no tariff on goods circulating within the UK customs territory, that is between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, unless they are at risk of entering the EU. It ensures an open border on the island of Ireland, a common objective of everyone in this House. And it ensures for those living and working alongside the border There will be no visible or practical changes to their lives. They can carry on as before. I believe that this is a good arrangement, reconciling the special circumstances in Northern Ireland with the minimum possible bureaucratic consequences at a few points of arrival in Northern Ireland. And it is precisely to ensure that those arrangements are acceptable to the people of Northern Ireland that we have made consent a fundamental element of this new deal. So no arrangements can be imposed on Northern Ireland if they do not work for Northern Ireland. The people of Northern Ireland will have the right, under this agreement, to express or withhold their consent to these provisions by means of a majority vote in their Assembly 4 years after the end of the transition. And if the Assembly chooses to withhold consent, these provisions shall cease to apply after 2 years, during which the Joint Committee of the UK and EU would propose a new way forward in concert with Northern Ireland's institutions. And as soon as this House allows the process of extracting ourselves from the EU to be completed, the exciting enterprise of building a new relationship with our friends can begin, which has been too long delayed, and which they would delay any further. Mr. Speaker, I do not wish this project to be the project of any one government or any one party, but rather the endeavour of the United Kingdom as a whole. Only this Parliament can make this new relationship the work of the nation. And so Parliament should be at the heart of decision-making as we develop our approach, and I acknowledge that in the past we have not always acted perhaps in that spirit. So as we take forward our friendship with our closest neighbours and construct that new relationship, I will ensure that a broad and open process draws upon the wealth of expertise in every part of this House, including select committees and their chairs. Every party and every member who wishes to contribute will be invited to do so, and we shall start by debating the mandate for our negotiators in the next phase. Mr. Speaker, the ambition for our future friendship is contained in the revised political declaration, which also provides for this House to be free to decide our own laws and regulations. I have complete faith in this House to choose regulations that are in our best tradition of the highest standard, of the highest standards of environmental protections and workers' rights. No one anywhere in this chamber believes in lowering standards. Instead,
a lot of gesticulation. The statement by the Prime Minister must be heard, and it will be. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful. No one believes in lowering standards. Instead, we believe in improving them, as indeed we will be able to do, and seizing the opportunities of our new freedoms. For example, free from the common agricultural policy, we will have a far simpler system where we will reward farmers for improving our environment and animal welfare, many of whose provisions are impossible under the current arrangements, instead of just paying them for their acreage. And free from the common fisheries policy, we can ensure sustainable yields based on the latest science, not outdated methods of setting quotas. And these restored powers will be available not simply to this government, but to every future British government of any party to use as they see fit. That is what restoring sovereignty means. That is what is meant in practice by taking back control of our destiny. And our first decision, on which I believe there will be unanimity, is that in any future trade negotiations with any country, our National Health Service will not be on the table. Mr. Speaker, I am convinced that an overwhelming majority in this House, regardless of our personal views, wishes to see Brexit delivered in accordance with the referendum. A majority. And in this crucial mission, there can no longer be any argument for further delay. And as someone who passionately believed that we had to go back to our European friends to seek a better agreement, I must tell the House that with this new deal, the scope for future negotiation, for fruitful negotiation, has run its course. He said, that we couldn't reopen the withdrawal agreement, Mr. Speaker. They said we couldn't reopen the withdrawal agreement. They said we couldn't change a comma of the withdrawal agreement. They said we couldn't abolish the backstop, Mr. Speaker. We've done both. But it is now my judgment that we have reached the best possible solution. So those who agree, like me, that Brexit must be delivered, and who, like me, prefer to avoid a no-deal outcome, must abandon the delusion that this House can delay again. And I must tell the House in all candour that there is very little appetite among our friends in the EU for this business to be protracted by one extra day. They have had 3.5 years of this debate. It has distracted them from their own projects and their own ambitions. And if there is one feeling that unites the British public with a growing number of officials in the EU, it is a burning desire to get Brexit done. And I must tell the House again, in all candour, that whatever letters they may seek to force the government to write, it cannot change my judgment that further delay is pointless, expensive, and deeply corrosive of public trust. And people simply will not understand how politicians can say with one breath that they want delay to avoid no deal, and then with the next breath that they still want delay when a great deal is there to be done. Now is the time, Mr. Speaker, to get this thing done. And I say to all members, let us come together as Democrats to end this debilitating feud. Let us come together as Democrats to get behind this deal, the one proposition that fulfills the verdict of the majority, but which also allows us to bring together the two halves of our hearts, to bring together the two halves of our nation. Let's speak now, both for the 52 and for the 48. Let's go for a deal that can heal this country. Let's go for a deal that can heal this country and can allow us all to express our legitimate desires for the deepest possible friendship and partnership with our neighbours, a deal that allows us to create a shared destiny with them, and a deal that also allows us to express our confidence in our own democratic institutions, to make our own laws, to determine our own future, to believe in ourselves once again as an open, generous, global, outward-looking, free-trading, united kingdom. That is the prospect. That is the prospect that this deal offers our country. It is a great prospect and a great deal, and I commend it to the House.
I call the Leader of the Opposition, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I join you in thanking all the staff that have come into the House this morning to help us. Cleaning staff, catering staff, security staff, officials and our own staff. They've given up a weekend in order to help our deliberations. I also want to thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of his statement. He has renegotiated the withdrawal agreement and made it even worse. He's renegotiated the political declaration and made that even worse. We're having a debate today on a text for which there is no economic impact assessment and no accompanying legal advice. This government has sought to avoid scrutiny throughout the process and yesterday evening made empty promises on workers' rights and the environment. The same government that spent the last few weeks negotiating in secret to remove from the withdrawal agreement legally binding commitments on workers' rights and the environment. This government cannot be trusted, and these benches will not be duped. Neither will the government's Neither, Mr. Speaker, will the government's own workers. The head of the civil service union Prospect yesterday met the Right Honourable Member for Surrey Heath, and at the conclusion of that meeting he said, and I quote, "I asked for reassurances that the government would not diverge on workers' rights after Brexit. He could not give me those assurances." And as for the much-hyped world-leading Environment Bill, the legally binding targets will not be enforceable until 2037. For this government, the climate emergency can always wait. Mr. Speaker, this deal risks people's jobs, rights at work, our environment and our National Health Service. We must be honest about what this deal means for our manufacturing industry and people's jobs. Not only does it reduce access to the market of our biggest trading partner, it leaves us without a customs union, which will damage industries all across this country in every one of our constituencies. From Nissan in Sunderland, Heinz in Wigan, Airbus in Broughton and Jaguar Land Rover in Birmingham, thousands of British jobs depend on a strong manufacturing sector. And a strong manufacturing sector needs markets through fluid supply chains all across the European Union. A vote for this deal would be a vote to cut manufacturing jobs all across this country. This deal, Mr. Speaker, would inevitably and absolutely inevitably lead to a Trump trade deal, forcing the UK to diverge from the highest standards and expose our families once again to chlorine-washed chicken and hormone-treated beef. This deal...
Order. I did say that the statement by the Prime Minister must be heard. The response of the Leader of the Opposition in the best traditions of parliamentary democracy must also be heard, and it will. Jeremy Corbyn.
This deal fails to enshrine the principle that we keep pace with the European Union on environmental standards and protections, putting at risk our current rules from air pollution standards to chemical safety. We all know the public concern about these issues, all at the same time that we're facing a climate emergency. And as for workers' rights, we simply cannot give the government a blank cheque. Mr. Speaker, you don't have to take my word for all of this. Listen, for example, to the TUC General Secretary Frances O'Grady, who says this. She does represent an organisation. She does represent an organisation that has 6 million members affiliated to it. This deal, Mr. Speaker, would be a disaster for working people. It would hammer the economy, cost jobs and sell workers' rights down the river. Listen to Make UK, representing British manufacturers, who say, and I quote, "This is Make UK's comments on this deal. Members opposite might care to listen to them. Commitments to the closest possible trading relationships in goods have gone. Under this deal, differences in regulation between the UK and the EU will add cost and bureaucracy. Our companies will face a lack of clarity, inhibiting investment and planning." Listen also to the Green Alliance, who said the deal amounted to a very sad Brexit read from a climate perspective. The message, Mr. Speaker, is clear. This deal is not good for jobs, damaging for our industry and a threat to our environment and our natural world. It's not a good deal for our country, and future generations will feel the impact. It should be voted down today by this House. Mr. Speaker, I also totally understand the frustration and the fatigue across the country and in this House. But we simply cannot vote for a deal that is even worse than the one the House rejected 3 times. The government's own economic analysis shows this deal would make the poorest regions even poorer and cost each person in this country over £2,000 per year. If we vote for a deal that makes our constituents poorer, we are not likely to be forgiven for doing that. Mr. Speaker, the government is claiming that if we support their deal, it will get Brexit done, and that backing them today is the only way to stop a no deal. I simply say nonsense. Supporting the government this afternoon would merely fire the starting pistol in a race to the bottom in regulations and standards. And if anyone had any doubts about this, we only have to listen to what their own honourable members have been saying. Like the one yesterday, who rather let the cat out of the bag, saying members should back this deal as it means we can leave with no deal by 2020. The cat has truly got out of the bag. So, can the Prime Minister confirm whether this is the case, and that if a free trade agreement has not been done, it would mean Britain falling on to World Trade Organization terms by December next year, with only Northern Ireland having preferential access to the EU market? No wonder the Foreign Secretary has said that this represents, and I quote, a cracking deal for Northern Ireland. They would retain frictionless access to the single market. It does beg the question, Mr. Speaker, why can't the rest of the UK get a cracking deal by maintaining access to the single market? The Taoiseach said, and I quote, "It allows the all-Ireland economy to continue to develop and one which protects the European single market." Some members of this House do welcome an all-Ireland economy, but I didn't think that included the government and the Conservative and Unionist Party. The Prime Minister declared in the summer, "Under no circumstances will I allow the EU or anyone else to create any kind of division down the Irish Sea." You cannot trust a word that he says. Mr. Speaker, voting for a deal today won't end Brexit. It won't deliver certainty, and the people should have the final say. Labour is not prepared to sell out the communities that we represent. We are not prepared to sell out their future, and we will not back this sell-out deal. This is about our communities now and about our future generations.
The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I must confess that I am disappointed by the tone that the right honourable gentleman has taken today, because I had thought that he might rise to the occasion and see that the electorate broadly, and indeed the electorate, I believe his own electorate, would want to do, and that is to get Brexit done. And I must say, I thought that he would wish to reflect the will of the people who voted for Brexit in such numbers in 2016 and have waited for a very long time. He's wrong about environmental and social protection. This government, this country will maintain the very highest standards, and we will lead in environmental protection and social protection across Europe and the world. We lead, for instance, in our commitment to be carbon neutral by 2050, and as I've told him many times before, this freedom, Brexit, gives us the opportunity to do things that we have not been able to do and that are deeply desired by the British people, such as banning the live export of animals. And I do think, to say nothing of shark fencing, many other things that we can do differently and better. He's wrong, Mr. Speaker, about business. The overwhelming view of business is that there are great opportunities from Brexit, but also as both Sir Stuart Rose, who I think was a former chairman of the Remain campaign, and the Governor of the Bank of England have said today, this is a good deal for the British economy. And indeed, as I look ahead, Mr. Speaker, the only risk I see to the British economy are the catastrophic plans of the right honourable gentleman and his semi-Marxist party. What British business wants is the certainty and the stability of getting Brexit done on October the 31st, and then the opportunity to build a new future with our European partners and to do free trade deals around the world. Mr. Speaker, he is wrong about Northern Ireland, which will exit the EU customs union along with the rest of the UK, I may say in defiance of what the Commission and indeed the Irish government had intended. And he talks about trust, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can't think of anything. This is a right honourable gentleman. I don't wish to be unnecessarily adversarial today. This is a right honourable gentleman. This is a right honourable gentleman who patently does not trust his own party. He doesn't trust the shadow. He doesn't trust the shadow chancellor. Above all, he has not been willing to trust the people of this country by granting them the right to adjudicate on him and his policies in a general election. He won't trust the people, and he doesn't trust the people by delivering on the result of their referendum in 2016. Mr. Speaker, I suggest in all humility and candour to the House that they should ignore the pleadings of the honourable gentleman and vote for an excellent deal that will take this country and take the whole of Europe forward.
Mr. Kenneth Clarke.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister began his statement, for which I am grateful, by saying that how rare it had been in this House ever for people to support federalism and a United States of Europe. And I entirely agree with that. Federalism and the belief in a superstate are as rare in this country as they are nowadays in every one of the other 27 member states. But would he accept that for the last 50 years, the Conservative Party, the vast majority of the Conservative Party, and all four Conservative Prime Ministers in whose governments I served, believed that membership of the European Union gave us a stronger voice politically in the world as one of the three leading members of the European Union, and gave us access to a free trade market that enabled us to build a strong and competitive economy. So would he reassure me, as I assure him I will vote for his deal once we have given legislative effect to it, that when he goes on to negotiate the eventual long-term arrangements, he will seek a solution where we have the same completely open access across the Channel, across the Irish border, to trade and investment in both directions with the European Union that we have now, even if we have to sacrifice the political benefits we've hitherto enjoyed from membership of the Union.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to agree with my right honourable friend in at least part of his analysis, because he says that there's a scepticism across the EU and across the continent at the moment about federalism and the desire to build a European Union superstate. And I think he's right in that, Mr. Speaker. But unfortunately, that scepticism has not percolated up, as it were, to the elites who run the EU and those who set the agenda in Brussels.
Order! Every member who has the floor must be heard. The Prime Minister.
I think I'm making a valid point, Mr. Speaker, which is that in Brussels, the message that my right honourable friend sends has not really been perfectly understood, and they continue with a large number of federalist projects. And I was at the European Council only the last couple of days, hearing the distinguished President of France calling for a union bancaire, Mr. Speaker, a banking union. There is a strong desire. They wish to intensify by creating a defence pact. There is a strong desire, a banking union, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. There is a strong desire. There is a strong desire to continue the process. That's B-A-N-C-A-I-R-E, Mr. Speaker. There is a strong desire to continue the process of integration in a way that I think would meet the scepticism not just of my right honourable friend, but also millions of people around the EU. And I can give him, Mr. Speaker, the absolute reassurance that in the course of the negotiations, in which, as I say, we would want the entire House, or as many as possible wanted to be involved, to take part, we will ensure that we have exactly what I think he desires: a zero tariff, zero quota, a free trade partnership, so that there is the maximum trade between, and increasing trade between our economies.
In Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I join you in thanking all the staff that have made today's sitting possible, and my thanks to the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement. Mr. Speaker, Northern Ireland 13, Scotland 0. That's the number of references to Northern Ireland in the statement. Not one reference to Scotland. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has returned from Brussels to present a deal that he knows, that we all know, is actually worse than Theresa May's deal. A deal that would see Scotland shafted by this United Kingdom government, left at an economic disadvantage, with Scotland's views and interests totally disregarded by this Prime Minister and his government. Mr. Speaker, the Scottish National Party could not have been clearer. We would support any mandate to approach the European Union, to remain in the single market and the customs union, or simply remain in the European Union altogether. Yet the Prime Minister has made it clear he was not and is not interested in meaningful discussions with the SNP or with our Scottish Government. He and his cronies in Number 10 don't care about Scotland. This Tory government has sold Scotland out, and once again they have let Scotland down. While rightfully Northern Ireland has been allowed special arrangements to remain in the EU single market and customs union, the Prime Minister will not afford Scotland the same arrangements. He didn't even consider giving Scotland a fair deal. Mr. Speaker, despite the fact that the Scottish people, like the people of Northern Ireland, voted overwhelmingly to remain in the European Union, this Prime Minister has never entertained the notion of giving Scotland the same arrangements that Northern Ireland gets in this deal. The truth is that this Prime Minister doesn't care about Scotland. He and his government have treated the Scottish Government, our Scottish Parliament and the Scottish people, but nothing with contempt. Mr. Speaker, not a single MP who cares about Scotland's future should consider supporting the Prime Minister today. They should stand with the Scottish National Party and vote this deal down. Any and all assessments of any Brexit outcome show that the United Kingdom and that Scotland will be poorer no matter how we leave the European Union. People up and down Scotland know that the Prime Minister and his Brexit fanboys and the Vote Leave campaign have ignored and shafted Scotland. Mr. Speaker, England is getting what it voted for. Wales is getting what it voted for. And Northern Ireland is getting a special deal. Yet Scotland, that democratically voted to remain, is being ignored and treated as a second-class nation by this government. Can the Prime Minister tell us now, how will he justify himself to the people of Scotland at the general election? When he cannot, and when he fails, And when the Brexit backing fan club from all quarters fails, will he finally respect the mandate of the Scottish people and let them have their say on our future?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the right honourable gentleman. I'm sure he will want to join me, and I'm sure his colleagues will want to join me in congratulating the England rugby team on a 40-16 victory over Australia. And I admire there was a lot of enthusiasm, I thought, in his response. And Mr. Speaker, I must say that I think he's being a little bit churlish in his response, because after all, I didn't mention England and I didn't mention Wales, and the reason, of course, that Northern Ireland is a particular subject of discussion, it's a legitimate point, is that there are particular circumstances in Northern Ireland at the border which deserve particular respect and sensitivity, and that is what they have received in this deal. This is a great deal for England, it's a great deal for Wales, it's a great deal for Scotland, and it's a great deal for Northern Ireland. And for the people of Scotland, they now have the chance, championed by wonderful Scottish Conservative MPs, to take back control, Mr. Speaker, to take back control of their fisheries from the end of next year and allow the people of Scotland at last to enjoy the benefits of their spectacular marine wealth in a way that they would be denied under the Scottish Nationalist Party, who, as I never tire of telling you, Mr. Speaker, would hand back control of Scottish fishing to Brussels.
Mr. Ian Duncan Smith.
Mr. Speaker, may I take issue with my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, gently, that for 27 years some of us have been warning about the federal nature of the European Union. I said gently. May I also say to my honourable friend that I am in real agreement as I stand here today with my right honourable friend, the Leader of the House, the Father of the House, I beg your pardon, who has said that he will back this deal today, so will I. And I want to ask him, therefore, in that spirit, would he please come to the dispatch box and ask the member for West Dorset to please now, recognising we need to have a meaningful vote, to withdraw his amendment and give the British people what they are dying for is a decision on Brexit.
Well, I'm full of respect for the contributions that my right honourable friend has made over many, many years on this subject, and I didn't mean in any way to exclude him from to say that he hadn't made important contributions on the subject of a federal Europe. What I said was that I hadn't heard people often speaking up in favour of integration of this country into a federal Europe, federal EU, Mr. Speaker. On his point about the amendment that I believe is being proposed, and I think you have accepted, from the honourable member, my right honourable friend from West Dorset. I do think that this is a momentous occasion for our country and for our Parliament. And it would be a great shame if the opportunity to have a meaningful vote, which is what I believe this House has been convoked to do, were to be taken away from us. And I just say that with the greatest respect to my right honourable friend, who I think is actuated by the best possible intentions.
Joe Swinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister's deal removes protections on workers' rights. It puts a border down...
Order. We've all agreed recently on the importance of mutual respect. The Leader of the Liberal Democrats is entitled to be heard, and believe me, she will not, under any circumstances, be shouted down. Joe Swinson.
The Prime Minister's deal removes protections on workers' rights. It puts a border down the Irish Sea, and according to the government's own analysis, will damage our economy on a scale greater than the financial crash. Today, hundreds of thousands of people will be outside demanding a final say in a people's vote. Isn't the truth that the reason the Prime Minister refuses their calls is because he knows that if given the option, the people will reject his bad deal and choose to remain in the European Union.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid that the Right Honourable Lady is not correct in what she says. The New Deal does absolutely nothing to remove protections from workers or from the environment. On the contrary, it gives us the opportunity to strengthen such protections. And she asks for the people to have a final say, Mr. Speaker, at the ballot box, and yet she's been preventing a general election, Mr. Speaker. In addition to her, instead of campaigning in general election, she's been in Brussels asking the EU not to give this country a new and better deal. And I think the mere fact that we have a great deal before us today is a tribute to the signal lack of influence of the Liberal Democrats in Brussels.
Order. I certainly don't anticipate that it will be possible to call everybody on the statement, and we will want to proceed with the debate on the motions, but in the name of maximising participation, there is a premium upon brevity from back and front benches alike. Mr. David Davis.
Despite the fact that those who oppose Brexit have tried to undermine his negotiating position at every turn, despite the fact that the Benn Act sought to remove his strongest negotiating lever, the Prime Minister has done what they said was impossible 2 weeks ago and got the European Union to reopen and change their negotiating position. Does he agree with me that during the referendum this Parliament effectively made a promise to the British people to deliver on their decision? And today is the day to deliver on that promise.
I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for what he has said, and he is indeed correct that I do believe this excellent deal dispels the doubts of many people about what this country could achieve and indeed will achieve in the future. And I thank him, my fellow campaigner on this issue, for the way he has stood up for the vision that we both share for our country as an open, global, free-trading, generous, outward-looking, but European economy. That is what this deal allows us to be. I believe it is a great step forward, and I hope the House endorses it.
Nigel Dodds.
Mr. Speaker, weariness in this House over Brexit should not be an excuse for weakness on Brexit or weakness on the Union. This party has supported respecting the right of the people of the United Kingdom's referendum decision to leave the European Union. We have supported that. We continue to support that, but it must be Brexit for the whole of the United Kingdom, leaving the single market and the customs union, if that is what the rest of the UK does, along with the rest of the UK. This deal puts Northern Ireland, yes, in the UK customs union, but applies de facto all the European customs union code. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Read the detail. It also puts us in the VAT regime.
Yes.
It also puts us in the single market regime for a large part of goods and agri-food without any consent up front, contrary to the agreement made in December 2017, which said that only regulatory difference could happen with the consent of the Executive and the Assembly. It drives a coach and horses through the Belfast Agreement by altering the cross-community consent mechanism. It was once said that no British Prime Minister could ever agree to such terms. And indeed, those who sought the leadership of the Tory party said that at our conference.
Yes.
Will he now abide by that and please reconsider the fact that we must leave as one nation together? There may be special circumstances for Northern Ireland, but that can only be with the consent of the people of Northern Ireland, Unionists and Nationalists together. That is the basis on which the peace process, the political process, has advanced. He must respect that.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I must say that, well, first of all, I'd say I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman in this sense, that together he and I and the rest of his group did make a case powerfully to the EU that it was necessary for Northern Ireland to come out of the customs union, which was not, by the way, a point that was accepted by them. And we were successful in that. Insofar as he is critical of the arrangements, and by the way, the significant point about a customs union is it is a union that sets its own tariffs, its own duties at the perimeter around that customs union. That is what the whole of the UK will do, including Northern Ireland, and it was not, let's be frank, Mr. Speaker, what the European Commission or our European friends thought would be the result of these negotiations. I believe it's a great success for Northern Ireland and for the whole of the country. And the arrangements that have made that possible, of course, are temporary, and they are determined by consent. And I must say, Mr. Speaker, in all frankness, I do think it a pity that it is thought necessary for one side or the other in the debate in Northern Ireland to have a veto on those arrangements. Because after all, I must be very frank about this, Mr. Speaker, because after all, the people of this country have taken a great decision embracing the entire four nations of this country, by a simple majority vote that went 52-48, which we are honouring now. And I think that principle should be applied elsewhere. And I see no reason why it should not be applied in Northern Ireland as well. And it is in full compatibility, Mr. Speaker, with the Good Friday Agreement.
Mr. Philip Hammond.
Mr. Speaker, before I decide whether to jump on the Prime Minister's bus, I'd like to be just a little clearer about the destination. I'd like to be reassured that it remains the deep and special partnership with the European Union that we promised the British people in our 2017 election manifesto. And in the absence of the UK-wide backstop, which is now gone from the package, the best way to give us that reassurance is to ensure a proper role for Parliament in the process of the future negotiations. So could the Prime Minister today make a commitment to accept what are known as the Nandy-Snell amendments, which the previous government agreed would prevail? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I can certainly give that commitment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This agreement will maintain friction-free access to this European market for Northern Ireland. Can the Prime Minister therefore explain why he is so determined to deny that exact same benefit to the rest of the United Kingdom? Because I say to him that if he presses on with that path, he will not heal the rift to which he referred a moment ago. He will only serve to widen it further.
Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman, whom I have a high regard, is, I think, one of those who believes that we should delay further in the EU. I don't believe that. I think we should come out as one UK, and I think there's a very important difference between Northern Ireland and the other constituent parts of the UK, and that was evident. It's evident in the Good Friday Agreement. It's evident in the need to treat that particular land border with a great deal of sensitivity and respect, and that is, I think, something that is agreed on all sides of this House, and I think is appreciated by the right honourable gentleman himself.
Sir William Cash.
Speaker, will my right honourable friend personally guarantee that in the bill, the withdrawal bill, there will be a guarantee to protect in practice our parliamentary sovereignty, and furthermore that in relation to the withdrawal agreement, that there will be provision to protect the United Kingdom from any harmful matters relating to our vital national interests under a parliamentary system which will guarantee that this House will decide if there are any situations where we need to prevent EU laws from being harmful to those vital national interests during the course of the future arrangements that have been put in place.
Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman has campaigned on this matter for many, many years, and indeed there is a sense in which this occasion today is a colossal vindication of his parliamentary career, in the sense that he has long campaigned for us to come out of the EU. He raises an important point about our ability to protect this country from injurious or vexatious legislation coming from the EU during the period of the IP, and I can certainly give him the assurance that we will have such protection.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister's predecessor said in this place that no British Prime Minister could ever accept a deal that put a border down the Irish Sea. The Prime Minister himself went to the DUP conference not long ago and said the same thing to them. He has now agreed a deal which puts a border down the Irish Sea. So can the Prime Minister tell this House why on earth anyone in the country, let alone anyone in this place, will ever believe a reassurance that he ever gives, ever again?
I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid that the Right Honourable Lady is simply wrong. There will be no border down the Irish Sea. There are already checks for epidemiological purposes. There will be some customs checks, yes, but of course what we are trying to do is to avoid. But there will be no, Mr. Speaker, there will be no tariffs. There will be a single united customs union between all four nations of the UK, as she would expect. And that is what we have delivered. And we have delivered it, by the way, in defiance of the scepticism and the negativity of the party opposite, who continually said that it couldn't be done, and said that it was absolutely essential for Northern Ireland to remain in the customs union of the EU. We have solved the problem, and we have taken Northern Ireland out.
Damien Green.
Mr. Speaker, there are many of us who don't often feature at the noisy ends of the debate, who campaigned hard for Remain, but who accept the result of the referendum because we are above all Democrats. Many of us have said things like, we will do anything to avoid no deal. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that today is the day actually to make those words mean something and vote for a deal?
Well, can I thank my right honourable friend who has done much to bring our party and indeed the House together on this matter, and I couldn't agree with him more fervently. I really do think this is the day for everybody to put aside their differences, get this thing done. Our voters, the country, are looking at us. They expect us to deliver it. Let's do it today.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The democratic consent process doesn't remove the border down the Irish Sea. It simply moves the risk from determining the future of the border from Westminster to Stormont. So why does he believe that the deal will accord with the consensus built in the Good Friday Agreement?
Mr. Speaker, the deal is in perfect conformity with the Good Friday Agreement, and it is open to the people of Northern Ireland to vary the arrangements that I've described if they so choose.
Sir Patrick McLaughlin.
Was not the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, right on the 22nd of February 2016 when he said that we welcome the fact that the hands of the people will now decide whether we remain in the European Union or not? Did they not come to a conclusion on that? He was right then. Shouldn't we now carry out that instruction?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I do think that the better angels of the Right Honourable Gentleman's nature may still agree with that position. But my impression is that he has been in some way captured by those who wish now to, and is held hostage by those who now wish to convert the Labour Party into the party of revoke, of dither, a delay, a second referendum, more turmoil, more uncertainty, by the way, for business for years to come.
Is Savile Roberts?
The Prime Minister asks us with passionate words to vote for his deal with our hearts. But my head can't get around the fact that we're being asked to accept his words in trusting ignorance of their full implications. And my heart tells me that the people of Wales will never be well served by his government. We're only ever an afterthought for this Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, He has refused to share the impact assessments, and he only revealed this 535-page legal text today for us to comprehend. How could Plaid Cymru ever support his billionaire's Brexit?
Mr. Speaker, it seems to me that the Right Honourable Lady may conceivably have made up her mind about the 535 pages that she has in her hand before she'd perhaps scrutinised every word of the text. But I would gently remind her of what she and I both know, and I'm a fan of the Right Honourable Lady. What she and I both know is that Wales voted to leave, and I think she should respect that.
Caroline Noakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 12 minutes into his statement, the Prime Minister spoke of the importance of this place in the future negotiations. Can he please reassure me, therefore, that today sees the end of the campaign to portray it as Parliament against the people, and today we accept that it is Parliament working on behalf of people?
I thank my right honourable friend for her point, and I think she is absolutely right. This is the moment for Parliament and people to yoke hands, yoke arms, come together and get this thing done. That's what I...
Kate Hoey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has said very clearly that he wants to see a free trade deal by the end of 2020 for the whole of the United Kingdom. Will the Prime Minister then tell us very clearly that when that day comes, the protocol on Northern Ireland will be automatically changed, and Northern Ireland will then be part of a fully free trade deal with everything the same as the rest of the United Kingdom?
Mr. Speaker, as the Right Honourable Lady knows, what happens is that the protocol, the current arrangements that we have for Northern Ireland, the arrangements envisaged in this deal, lapse automatically, and the default position is full alignment with the UK in every respect, save unless the people of Northern Ireland decide by a majority vote to remain in alignment. That is always open to them. That must be fair. It is for a very small range of policy, and from the beginning, as I've explained to the House, Northern Ireland will not only be able to take part in free trade deals, but Northern Ireland will have many of the advantages and attractions of Brexit, in the sense that we can regulate differently and better, for instance, for financial services. We can have a free port, for instance, in Belfast. There are things that I see, as is their customary way, my distinguished friends in the Democratic Unionist Party accepting this good news. There are many advantages to be had. And yes, on her point, there is the prospect of a free trade agreement between us and the EU, under which these arrangements would eventually be superseded, because we would enter into free trade, as the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Father of the House, first indicated, a zero tariff, zero quota arrangement, under which the current arrangements would be obviated.
Dr. Greg Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will my right honourable friends give a commitment, in law if necessary, that workers' rights in this country will never be inferior to those of the European Union?
Mr. Speaker, yes, I certainly can.
Chris Leslie.
Mr. Speaker, honourable members are going to be promised. Mr. Speaker, honourable members are obviously going to be promised everything today by the Prime Minister. They should take it with a pinch of salt. But I have to tell the Prime Minister, it speaks volumes that he and the Chancellor have refused to publish a fresh economic impact assessment of his proposal today. But I think the Chancellor has said, well, one was produced last year, in November 2018, by his predecessor, where, on the basis of an average free trade agreement, it would see the British economy lag by 5% of GDP. So can he at least give us the courtesy at the dispatch box now of saying that that model, that average free trade agreement, down 5%, is the expectation we could have of his plan?
No, Mr. Speaker, it certainly is not.
Chris Grayling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend will remember from the referendum the strength of feeling that he and I experienced in some of our most deprived communities about Brexit. Could he gently explain to the Leader of the Opposition the sense of betrayal that will be felt in those communities if we do not now deliver Brexit?
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend is completely correct in what he says, and I think that it is a feeling that is well known to members on the other side of the House and well known on our benches as well. The people of this country, wherever they come from, are coming together now in a desire to get Brexit done, and I hope that this House will today reflect that will.
Cherry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At present, the United Kingdom consists of England, Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland. In both Northern Ireland and Scotland, there's no mandate for Brexit. The deal we're being asked to vote for today gives Northern Ireland a deal which keeps it close to the single market and the customs union, subject to its consent. Can he explain to me and my constituents in what way it strengthens the union of the United Kingdom for Scotland alone to have foisted upon it a Brexit it didn't vote for?
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid there's a complete conceptual confusion here. Scotland and the whole of the UK is coming out of the customs union. There are particular arrangements that are being put in place to avoid a hard border in Northern Ireland, which I think is an objective that the whole House supports. And as for the people of Scotland, they had a referendum, as she knows full well, in 2014. They voted very substantially to remain in the United Kingdom. That was the correct decision. They were told it was a once-in-a-generation decision, Mr. Speaker, and I see no reason whatever to betray that promise that was made to them then.
Justine Greening.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister, I think, has said he now wants to speak for the 52% and the 48%. But does he recognise that the rhetoric and the actions and the way that this government has approached Brexit achieves the exact opposite of that, actually? And does he also recognise that dismissing concerns of communities like my own is no way to bring even England back together, and dismissing concerns of other nations within the United Kingdom is also no way to bring the UK and Britain back together either?
Mr. Speaker, I certainly didn't mean to dismiss anybody's concerns, and let alone her own. And I recognise that, as I think I said in my opening statement, that this is an issue that has aroused deep feeling across the country on both sides. But it is my strong belief that the way forward for this country now is to deliver Brexit, get it done, and move our country forward, because that is the way, I believe, that people can honestly and passionately express their pro-European views in a new, deep and special partnership of the kind that that both of us campaigned for.
Barry Shearman.
Mr. Speaker, 40 years ago I heard a Conservative leader who had, although I disagreed with much that she believed in, but I believed in her loyalty and I trusted her, and she brought the nation together with a great speech. I didn't hear that this morning. What I heard was a man who leads this country who no people don't trust. And he keeps saying, trust. Who will trust the British people? If we want the British people to trust, will you agree with me, we should have a referendum so people can judge this deal for what it is, and then we can have a general election after that?
Mr. Speaker, I think the best way to show our trust in the people is to repay their trust in us by honouring their mandate and delivering on the verdict of the people, and that is what we should do today, and I hope very much that the honourable gentleman will join us in the lobby tonight.
Mrs. Cheryl Murray.
Mr. Speaker, will my right honourable friend reassure the fishermen in my constituency that he will put right the wrong heaped on them over 40 years ago, and they will get a better share of the fish from UK waters?
Mr. Speaker, they certainly shall, and I congratulate and I thank my honourable friend for everything she does to stick up for UK fishing. Fishing has a glorious future in this country, in the West Country and in Scotland too, if only this House will do the right thing and allow us to come out on October the 31st.
The honourable gentleman for Slough thinks that nodding at me vigorously to the extent that it virtually constitutes a bow is the most efficacious means of being called. The honourable gentleman may have his opportunity in due course, but he may well have his opportunity. But first of all, I want to hear Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How can this House have any confidence in the Prime Minister's claims that he doesn't want to lower standards when his own deal precisely moves the so-called level playing field from the binding withdrawal agreement into the non-binding political declaration? Isn't the truth that this deal takes a wrecking ball to our social and environmental standards, and the reason that he won't put it back to the British people is because he knows full well that they see through his bluster and they can see that this is a profoundly bad deal.
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid the right honourable lady has totally misread or misunderstood the provisions of the agreement. There it is stated plainly in the political declaration that we will maintain the highest possible standards, and it is up to this House to do so. And I think it's the will of this House, and indeed it's the will of this government, to have even higher standards. This is the party, this is the government that has banned microbeads, that is cracking down on plastics, that is leading the world in going for zero carbon by 2050. We are world leaders in environment and animal welfare protection, and we will continue to be so outside the EU.
Hear, hear. The time has come to uncork the gawk. Mr. David Gork.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has said that he wanted to leave with a deal, and he has shown determination and flexibility to reach a deal for which he deserves credit. He will be aware, however, that unless we reach a free trade agreement in the next stage of negotiations, that there is a risk that Great Britain will leave the implementation period without a deal with the European Union. Can the Prime Minister commit today to show the same determination and flexibility to ensure that we do reach a deep and special partnership through a free trade agreement with the European Union before we allow the implementation period to come to an end?
My right honourable friend makes an excellent point, and indeed it was a point that was really the substantive one that I was discussing with our European Union friends in the last couple of days, because that's where they want to go now. They're interested in our timetable. They're interested in whether 14 months is enough. He's absolutely right to focus on this. I think, Mr. Speaker, it is enough. I think we can do it in 14 months. And I'll tell you why. The right honourable lady asked from a sedentary position. She may not know that we are already in perfect regulatory alignment with the European Union. It may have escaped her that we already have zero tariff and zero quota arrangements with the EU. We have a fantastic opportunity to do a free trade deal. Yes, 14 months is a blistering pace, Mr. Speaker, but we can get it done. And I just remind doubters and sceptics that they said it was impossible to reopen the withdrawal agreement. There they all are. They said we'd never get rid of the backstop, Mr. Speaker. They said we'd never get a deal, Mr. Speaker. There's a very good deal on the table here today, and I hope they vote for it.
Patience rewarded. Tanmanjeet Singh Desi.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, while addressing the DUP conference in Northern Ireland, the Prime Minister promised that there would be no border down the Irish Sea, neither the customs one, neither a regulatory one, nor any other sort. He promised the same thing to his Conservative colleagues during his pursuit for power to become the Jungle King. So would the Prime Minister like to take this opportunity to formally apologise to the DUP, his Conservative colleagues and the good people of Northern Ireland for having sold them down the river and for having broken yet another promise?
Well, I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman, but I must say, in all candour and humility, he misrepresents what I think is an excellent deal that takes Northern Ireland out of the EU customs union, preserves it in the UK's customs territory, does not create a border in the Irish Sea, and allows us together as a single United Kingdom to do free trade deals around the world. And I think his constituents would want him to support this deal and get Brexit done tonight, and get Brexit done on October the 31st.
John Barron.
Mr. Speaker, I wholeheartedly commend my right honourable friend for abolishing the anti-democratic backstop, and on that basis I will be supporting this deal today, having opposed the previous deal. But can I suggest this to him? Given that I and most of us in this place want a fair and good trade deal and prefer that to no deal, does he accept that by abolishing the anti-democratic backstop, we actually not only make a good and fair trade deal more likely, but we almost guarantee it, given the common position we start from and our common interests with the EU?
My right honourable friend is spot on, Mr. Speaker, and he is right that both sides have a strong incentive to do a very, very good, best-in-class free trade deal by the end of next year. That's our ambition, and that's what we're going to achieve.
Prime Minister's Brexit Secretary was on television this morning, and he confirmed that no economic analysis of the deal has been done. I ask the House to let that sink in. No economic analysis of the deal has been done, which we are all expected to vote on today. How does the Prime Minister anticipate that members on all sides of this House, in good faith, for a deal that's going to impact on our country for decades to come, can be expected to vote on such a thing today?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I respectfully point out to the honourable lady that the deal has been welcomed by a broad range of opinion, including the Governor of the Bank of England and indeed the CBI. And the choice for her today is between this deal, which I believe is very good for this country, both economically and politically, and no deal. That's what she has to decide between.
Mr. Peter Bowe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Article 126 of the withdrawal agreement says that the transition period ends on the 31st December 2020. But a few articles later, 132, it says it can be extended for a further 2 years. If it was extended, we would still be effectively in the European Union 6.5 years after the referendum. Could the Prime Minister say that while he is Prime Minister, he would not consider extending past the 31st December 2020?
My honourable friend chose his customary sagacity and grip on detail. He's absolutely right about Article 126, but of course that article provides for the UK and the EU to decide that matter by a joint committee, and the UK would therefore have a discretionary veto in that matter. And I can tell him now, I certainly would not want to extend beyond the end of next year, nor do I see any reason for delay, as indeed nor do I see any reason or excuse for delay beyond October the 31st.
McFadden.
There is a philosophical problem at the core of the Prime Minister's argument today. He is promising his colleagues, particularly his most ardent Brexit-supporting colleagues, that the proposals before us offer a pathway to the deregulated future of which they have always dreamed. And at the same time, he is saying to Labour colleagues that he now has a newfound love for all the European workers' rights, that he built a journalistic career slagging off in the strongest terms. Both of these things cannot be true. So which one is?
Prime Minister! Mr. Speaker, well, he's right in what he says, because, of course, the first few things he said were wholly incorrect. There will be a high standard maintained, the very highest standards maintained for workers' rights and environmental protection. And if he isn't content with that, then of course it is open to him, as a member of this House, as I have said, to take part in the setting of the mandate for the future partnership and to engage, as all parliamentarians are invited to engage, in drawing up the terms of our future partnership. And I hope he takes up that offer.
Mr. Richard Drax.
Mr. Speaker, as I understand it, the £39 billion for an FTA is based on EU alignment. Can my right honourable friend confirm and reassure me that that will not affect or restrict UK tax, foreign or defence policies?
I can certainly give my honourable friend that assurance.
Lady Herman.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will be well aware of the considerable anxiety and indeed anger caused to the unionist community in Northern Ireland since the publication of his Brexit deal. I would like the Prime Minister to take this opportunity, since he has not bothered until now to reach out and reassure the unionist community. I would like him to take this opportunity publicly to reassure the people in Northern Ireland that there is nothing in his deal which undermines the constitutional status of Northern Ireland as guaranteed by the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and the consent principle. I pay tribute to the Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, who has made a very, very solemn explanation and commitment about his commitment to the constitutional status of Northern Ireland. But as a unionist, I need to hear a British Prime Minister making that commitment to the unionist community.
Prime Minister. Of course, Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful to the right honourable lady, and I wish to reassure her that I make an absolute commitment to the constitutional status of Northern Ireland, which is inviolable and intact. And it may be that she hasn't seen the statement from Lord Trimble, who said of the change in the agreement that we have secured. Whilst previously the people of Northern Ireland were to have an agreement imposed on them, now we have a mechanism for the consent of the people of Northern Ireland, and that is fully in accordance with the Good Friday Agreement.
Alistair Burt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend is right to characterise the political participation of the UK in the EU too often as uncertain. And it's one of the great regrets of my time here that what he says is true, and we'll never know, in a way, what the EU might have looked like if the United Kingdom had been a full partner. But if a new relationship with us outside the EU, for which I will be voting today, is to be a success, not only for the trade negotiations but for the diplomatic links, does he agree with me, as they read our newspapers and they know what we say, that the relentless, persistent and too often 1940s anti-EU rhetoric must come to an end, no ifs and no buts?
Prime Minister.
I think, Mr. Speaker, he's absolutely right, and that it's time this country moved on. But I may say that the best way that he can show his support tonight for this deal would be to gently to suggest that his right honourable friend, the member for West Dorset, that we remove the amendment currently standing in his name, because that is, I'm afraid, an impediment to such a verdict tonight.
Alison Thewlis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, 71% in my constituency voted to remain. The world-class researchers doing world-class and life-saving research in universities in Glasgow are not half-hearted Europeans. The children at Pollockshield's primary and Erasmus Plus programmes are not half-hearted Europeans. And those citizens completing European Social Fund-funded projects in Glasgow are not half-hearted Europeans either. Would he not agree with me now that the only way for the people in my constituency to be full members of the European Union and retain that citizenship is for Scotland to be an independent country?
I think she's making a very important point, because people feel very strongly about this matter and they also feel very differently about it. And I think what we have today is an opportunity to take the country forward with a new relationship that allows people who feel wholeheartedly passionate about Europe to express those feelings. And yes, students, professors, academics, artists, creators of all kinds will be able to share their enthusiasms with their friends across the EU under this deal. That is absolutely vital, and it is part of our ambition for the UK and for Europe.
James Brokenshire.
Mr. Speaker, I support my right honourable friend in securing this deal, but he will acknowledge the concerns that have been expressed in relation to Northern Ireland, in addition to his commitments that he has given, especially over the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. Please would he reaffirm his commitment to a new deal for Northern Ireland, investing in its infrastructure, investing in its prosperity, investing in its future as a proud part of our precious United Kingdom.
I thank my right honourable friend. I pay tribute to him and everything he has done for Northern Ireland. And I think he would agree with me that the one thing that would really make a difference now to all those policy fields in Northern Ireland and would take Northern Ireland furthest forward the fastest would be if we could get the Stormont Assembly up and running again, and if the parties came together for government in Northern Ireland once more.
Helen Hayes.
The government could have agreed to internationally binding legal commitments to maintain existing workers' rights and environmental protections, and to ensure that rights keep pace in the future. At every stage, it has refused to do so. Can the Prime Minister explain why people across this country should believe his empty promises now? And if the Prime Minister is so confident that the British public will not see through his hollow rhetoric, why is he so afraid of giving them a final say?
Well, the honourable lady will know that the plan is, if you look at the provisions that we have on workers' rights and environmental protections in the political declaration, they're very ambitious. We want to maintain the highest possible standards. And of course, whenever the EU, she should understand, whenever the EU introduces a new provision on workers' rights, even if it is in some way inferior to our own by then, Parliament will have an opportunity to consider that provision, that new provision from the EU, and to put it into UK law.
Jeremy Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister said at the outset of his statement that the debate about our membership of the European Union has not just paralysed our politics, but it's profoundly divided our society. And the longer we have this debate, the more difficult it will be to reunite our country. So isn't it incumbent on all of us in this place today to act in a way that seeks to settle that debate, not seeks to perpetuate it, and that we do not reject what is a good deal in the fruitless and impractical pursuit of a perfect deal?
Prime Minister.
My right honourable friend is perfectly right. I think that this deal is about as perfect as you could get under the circumstances. I say so myself. But yes, of course, there are difficulties. There are difficulties with it, and I accept that people do have objections to the current arrangements. And all I can say is that those arrangements are there expressly by consent. They are time limited, and we will go forward with a new, deep and special partnership with our European Union friends that will supersede those arrangements. So I think we should be very proud of the deal that we've got today. Let's knock it through, if we possibly can, tonight.
Tom Brake.
Would the Prime Minister agree to pass an act which would make it unlawful for us to leave at the end of the transition phase without a deal?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if I may say so respectfully, I do not believe that such acts have been necessarily conducive to a stable negotiating position. I think that and by the way, I haven't done enough in this statement, Mr. Speaker, to thank my team and the teams in the Foreign Office, in DEXU, in all the departments of state, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, and many, many others who've worked to make David Frost and many others who've worked to make this deal happen. I want to thank them very much for what they've done. And I don't think their position has been made easier, if I may respectfully say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, by measures that have been passed in the name of the Right Honourable Gentleman opposite. Not a good idea.
David Topcat Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The people of Wales, Mr. Speaker, voted to leave, but many had concerns about a no-deal Brexit. Can I thank the Prime Minister for coming forward with a deal that respects the result in Wales, delivers on the concerns of those who didn't want a hard Brexit, as Welsh would say, ma hi'n bryd diolch yn fawr.
Prime Minister.
Diolch yn fawr, Mr. Speaker, I think is all. I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman, and he speaks for Wales as ever. I think it's a great deal for England, it's a great deal for Scotland, it's a great deal for Wales and Northern Ireland, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Gentleman, the member for Perth and North Perthshire, can now cheer up, because he's going to be heard. Mr. Pete Wishart!
It's a cheery disposition, Mr. Speaker, that Scotland says we reject this.
Order! But I want to hear the... Order! I want to hear the Honourable Gentleman, and I couldn't do so. I want to hear his dulcet tones. Blurt it out, Matt.
And I'm grateful to you, Mr. Speaker. And what Scotland says today is that we reject this rotten deal. We will be taken out of a European Union against national collective will. We will be deprived of the customs union, the single market. We will be left at a competitive disadvantage to our friends in Northern Ireland. Isn't it the case, Prime Minister? The only way Scotland can retain the EU membership it requires is to become an independent
I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, that he's sadly in error if he thinks that Northern Ireland is part of the EU customs union. It is simply not. It is part of the UK customs union, as indeed is Scotland, which is greatly to the benefit of the people of Scotland.
Nigel Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Ribble Valley voted 57% to leave. Every constituency in Lancashire, whether they are held by Labour MPs or Conservative MPs, voted to leave the European Union in 2016. What message would you have to the MPs representing Leave constituencies? How should they vote tonight?
Well, Minister, I remember vividly campaigning with my right honourable friend at cattle markets and elsewhere, where he attracted strong support for his views, and he's right. And I hope that very much that people in this House tonight will respect the views of their constituents, not just the sense that Brexit needs to be done, but also their passionate desire to move on to our dynamic domestic agenda, expanding our health service, improving our healthcare, investing in education, putting more police officers on the street and taking this country forward. The party opposite offers nothing but dither, division, doubt and delay, and I think they're completely mistaken.
Tulip Siddiq.
The Minister used the phrase European friends over and over again in his statement this morning, and we in this House know that the Prime Minister likes to treat his friends with great generosity. Bearing that in mind, will the Prime Minister distance himself from the comments of his Security Minister last week, who said that our European friends in this country could face deportation if they do not get settled status by next year?
Prime Minister.
Well, the honourable lady raises a very important point, and perhaps I should have said more about it in my opening remarks, because I do think one of the things that this government has done well over the last few years, and perhaps we should have been faster, but we are finally giving the 3.4 million the assurances that they need, and the EU settled status scheme is now really working extremely well. It is vital that everybody, all the EU citizens, members living in our country have the reassurances that they need. I may say it is also vital, and it's a point that I made to our colleagues in Brussels, it is also vital that there should be symmetry, because at the moment there is not perfect symmetry, and it's very important that as we come out and we give our EU nationals the treatment they deserve, that is reciprocated on the other side of the channel. By and large it is, but there is some progress to be made.
Mr. Stephen Crabb.
Mr. Speaker, would the Prime Minister confirm what business has been telling us for many months now, that there is enormous pent-up investment waiting to be released into the UK economy when the fog and lack of clarity of this stage of Brexit is lifted? And would he also confirm that the very last thing that business wants to see from the proceedings of today in this House of Commons is for further delay, further fogginess and further confusion?
Well, my honourable friend is completely right, and I do think that the whole business world has been, as it were, holding its breath, waiting for us to get this thing done. There is massive confidence and excitement about this country and its future, and they want to invest. Let's give them an opportunity to do it in the course of the next few weeks and months.
Might I agree with the right honourable gentleman's sentiments, the right honourable gentleman from Ashford? And would he not agree that one of the confusions that we face in the House, but more so in the country, is that some, not all, of those who wish to remain often appear in Brexit clothing, and that today there is a motion on the order paper for those of us who want to deliver on the promise in the referendum, and there is only one vote necessary.
Mr. Speaker, I think that the right honourable gentleman has spoken with his customary honesty and insight in this matter, and I think that it would be a good thing if this House had an ability to have what I think was promised to the House and to the country, and that is to have a meaningful vote tonight. My fear is that the vote that we have will not prove to be meaningful, and I think, given the solemnity of this occasion, that would be a great pity.
In the name of breadth and equality, having called Mr. Stephen Crabb, I now call Mr. Marcus Fish.
The union is of massive importance to many in this House. Will my right honourable friend commit to mitigate, to subsidise and defray the costs of any new arrangements for customs within Northern Ireland?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Not only that, but if he studies the agreement, he will see that it is open to the UK authorities to give support of any kind where necessary to alleviate any impacts that there may be from the arrangements that we will put in place, whatever the implications may be for state aids.
Mr. Stephen Timms.
Understand the worries of manufacturers about new rules of origin checks and other red tape that his deal would impose upon them, and the fears of Make UK that reassurances in the deal negotiated by his predecessor have been dropped from his deal.
The reason I'm not worried about that, Mr. Speaker, is there are no new rules of origins checks, and this is a deal that I hope he will get behind and support, because it represents stability and certainty for business.
Kirsten Hare.
There are other voices from Scotland that are asking Scottish MPs the National Farmers Union for Scotland, the Scottish Fishermen's Federation, the Federation of Small Businesses, the Scottish Chambers of Commerce, the Scotch Whisky Association, who all believe this is best for industry, the economy and jobs. Scottish nationalists will once again vote for a no-deal Brexit.
Mr. Speaker, there speaks the true voice of Scotland, and she is perfectly correct in what she says. And I venture to say, Mr. Speaker, that the constituents of the party opposite, the SNP, overwhelmingly tonight want that party, even that party, to get Brexit done and move this country on. I bet they do, Mr. Speaker.
I simply understand.
Sammy Wilson.
Speaker, the Prime Minister has said there'll be no border down the Irish Sea, yet every good
imported from GB into Northern Ireland, we subject to a customs declaration, a physical movement subject to checks, and tariffs have to be paid until it can be proved where the goods are going to. Will he accept that he may have avoided a regulatory border between Northern Ireland and the Republic, but he has put a legal, customs and economic border between the country to which we belong and the economy to which we depend? Rather than a great deal, this will do a great deal of damage to the Union.
It will.
Mr. Speaker, on the contrary, Mr. Speaker, what this does is protects Northern Ireland by extracting Northern Ireland whole and entire from the EU customs union, allows Northern Ireland to join the whole of the UK in setting our own tariffs, and insofar as there may be checks at a few places in Northern Ireland, physical checks would only involve 1% of the goods coming in, and if that is too much of a burden, then it is open to the people of Northern Ireland by a majority to decide that they no longer wish to participate in those arrangements. It is being done by consent. It is a very ingenious scheme that gets Northern Ireland out of the customs union and allows the whole of the UK to do free trade together with minimum bureaucracy.
Mr. Henry Smith.
Mr. Speaker, the British people are watching this place very carefully, and history is recording what we say. The clear majority message from my constituents is that they want the Brexit they voted for delivered, and this deal does that. Can I have an assurance from the Prime Minister that we will not only maintain but enhance our environmental and animal welfare standards?
Mr. Speaker, I can indeed give that assurance, and I can tell my honourable friend who campaigned to leave the EU for these reasons, amongst others, we will indeed have higher standards of protection for animal welfare, the environment and other matters.
David Hanson.
North Wales is a major artery to Northern Ireland by road and by boat, to the Irish Republic by road and by boat, but also to the Irish Republic through Northern Ireland by road and by boat. Given what he said today, that goods will be, unless they are at risk of entering the EU, in his statement, where and when are going to be the border checks, and where and when are going to be the tariffs, because they will face them under his proposals.
Mr. Speaker, there aren't any tariffs on goods. There aren't any tariffs, as he knows full well, there aren't any tariffs on goods going GB, NI or NI, GB.
Vicky Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We all know that the people of our country are desperate to end this uncertainty, but we often forget that the people of the other 27 countries are also desperate to end this uncertainty, and our Prime Minister has needed to get the consent from all 27 countries. Does he agree with me that if this House fails to back this deal today or seeks to kick the can down the road again, we create more uncertainty and not less?
Minister. My honourable friend is exactly right, and the choice is very clear today for this House and for the country. It is really this deal or a no-deal Brexit, because I do not think by any stretch of the imagination it can be right for the UK to delay beyond October the 31st, when that is expensive, pointless, a waste of spirit and an expensive shame that will achieve absolutely nothing whatever.
Dr. Sarah Wollaston.
Speaker, evidence matters, Prime Minister. How can you possibly assure our constituents that this is a good deal if the Prime Minister hasn't carried out an economic impact assessment of what it will cost them? And if he has carried that out, why on earth are we not able to see it as we debate this today?
Well said. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady, but I direct her really to the answers I've already given on this point. Many business groups have already come out in support of this deal because it gives certainty and stability and allows the country to move on. And as my right honourable friend said just now, I think it will unleash a great deal of investment in the UK.
Brian.
Sir, can I thank the Prime Minister for his statement and the tone with which he's delivered it today? He and I have had some robust conversations in the last 6 weeks, and he has done what he promised me he would do, which is seek a Brexit deal and bring it back to this House. I was very pleased to hear him mention the 48% today. There are a lot of people for whom we need to have the losers' consent to deliver Brexit safely. So would he agree that the way to do that is with the deal that he has proposed, which is well worthy of all of our support?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the support of my honourable friend means a great deal to me because he and I did have long conversations about this, and I did my best to convince him that I was in earnest in seeking a deal. I truly was, and I'm very pleased with the result that we have secured, and I'm delighted that he will feel able to support it tonight. I do, but I'm get back to the key point. It does give people who love Europe in the broadest possible way a real chance to move forward and work with us to develop a new partnership with our European friends. That is the opportunity. Everything else is stasis and division. This is the way forward.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member for Basildon and Billericay said yesterday, I am doing my best to persuade colleagues who, like me, voted 3 times against the last Prime Minister's deal to look at this in a favourable light, provided that we can get the assurance, and I have been given it so far, by people like the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster and the Foreign Secretary, that if our trade talks fail in December 2020, we will leave on no-deal terms. Mr. Speaker, have members of the Prime Minister's Cabinet given those assurances? And if, indeed, no deal is therefore not being ruled out by supporting the Prime Minister today, why won't he tell the country the truth?
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend, the member for Billericay, has made it very clear in the House just now, if she was listening, that he wants and will work for a great new free trade agreement, and that is indeed what we will do. And may I respectfully say to her, as I say to all honourable friends and members, that if they wish to avoid a no-deal outcome, the single best thing we can all do is vote for this deal tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I strongly support this deal, but is it not the case that in the issue of workers' rights, that whatever government, we will be able to, in this Parliament, strengthen workers' rights without recourse to an external authority? And is it also not the case that the billions of pounds that we save from leaving the European Union, we will be able to spend on public services and cutting the cost of living for ordinary folk across our country?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, that voice of Harlow is completely right, and we will be able to get on, by the way, with investing in hospitals in his area. Yes, of course, it is open to this House and to this country to strengthen workers' rights beyond the standards in the EU. But as I said to the honourable lady who spoke a moment ago, every new regulation or directive that comes from Brussels in this matter will of course be capable of being scrutinised by this House, and this House will be able to decide whether or not it is right to implement it in UK law. And it seems to me you can't say fairer than that. We can go further than them, but we can also track them if we choose.
Sir Vincent Cable.
Following the earlier question for the member from South House, the Prime Minister will know there's a great deal of anxiety in the business community that it faces a cliff edge at the end of next year. Can he reiterate what seemed to be his assurance that the transition will be extended until his free trade agreement has been concluded?
Mr. Speaker, I think if he's worried about a cliff edge, and I'm not, frankly, as worried as he is, but I think we'll do a great free trade deal by then, the best thing he can do, and I hope I'm looking at him carefully to see whether he might have this in his heart, is to vote for this deal tonight. He says he's opposed to a no-deal Brexit, Mr. Speaker. This is the way to avoid it.
Order. I'm sorry to disappoint remaining honourable and right honourable members, but having now called no fewer than 55 backbenchers, I judge that it is time to proceed to the debate.